On a seemingly quiet afternoon in February 2018, 32-week pregnant Fernanda Maciel sat down to a simple meal of beans and pico de gallo prepared by her mother, and those cherished snapshots would become the last proof anyone ever saw of her alive. Moments later, she stepped out onto a familiar street, her phone and keys the only companions she'd carry, and vanished without a trace. Weeks of painstaking investigation peeled back theory after theory. Yet nothing prepared Chile for the gruesome truth unearthed beneath a concrete slab in a neighbor's warehouse. How could a trusted friend turn a routine meeting into a calculated nightmare? And what really happened in those final, fatal minutes? This is the tragic story of Fernanda Maciel. On Saturday, October 2, 2018, a woman sat down to enjoy a simple meal of beans and pico de gallo, lovingly made by her mother, Paula. After finishing her meal, she left the house. The photos taken that day are the last known images of her. This case captured the attention of all Chile, sparking both widespread curiosity and concern. Fernanda Maciel was a small woman, reportedly under 5 feet tall. But what made her disappearance particularly shocking was that she was 7 months pregnant, around 32 weeks along. What confused both investigators and the public was that she seemed to have no reason to disappear. She was in a happy relationship with a boyfriend her family supported, and they were even planning to move into a new home together. Yet, when the truth about her disappearance finally came to light, it was so chilling it shook the entire nation. Warning: some aspects of this case are hard to hear. Reflecting on the day Fernanda disappeared, her mother noticed that she was unusually quiet. Paula later remembered that her daughter didn't interact with her younger siblings as she normally did. No chatting or joking around. Instead, Fernanda ate in silence. Then, precisely at 5:29 p.m., Fernanda left her home on Pontiego Street, carrying only her keys and phone. She crossed the intersection onto La Lima Road, a path she had taken countless times before. But this time, she never came back. Paula waited for hours, growing more and more worried. When her calls to Fernanda's phone went straight to voicemail, it became clear that something was wrong. Since Fernanda was in the late stages of her pregnancy, the situation felt even more alarming. On February 11th, the day after Fernanda disappeared, her mother, Paula, and her boyfriend, Luis Peterson, father of her unborn child, filed a missing person report with the police. Chile's main police force, the Carabineros, began investigating. But since there were no immediate signs of foul play, the Specialized Police to Investigations to Chile (PDI) unit had not yet been called in. The Carabineros circulated missing person posters, spread information on social media, and interviewed locals. Their biggest lead came from surveillance footage showing Fernanda crossing Pago Street at 5:29 p.m. Oddly, no other cameras nearby recorded her after that point. A neighbor named Ortega Migno claimed to have seen her heading toward the Andes Mountains, but that lead didn't produce any new information. Despite tireless searching, weeks turned into months without any progress. Fernanda's social media stayed silent, her bank accounts were untouched, and no credible sightings surfaced. As her due date neared, the mystery only grew deeper. Many feared the worst, but Fernanda's family never gave up. They stayed resolute in their search, determined to find the truth and bring her back home. To fully grasp the circumstances around Fernanda's disappearance, it's important to explore her life story. Fernanda Damaris Maciel Carrillo was born on September 5, 1996, in Independencia, Santiago, Chile. After her parents separated in 1999, she and her siblings were raised by their mother, Paula, who relocated the family to Calicura. At first, Fernanda adapted well to these changes. She did well in school, kept a cheerful attitude, and maintained contact with her father. But as she entered her teenage years, her behavior began to change. Her academic performance dropped, she became more irritable, and clashes with classmates' siblings, and even her mother became more frequent. Worried about her daughter's well-being, Paula reached out to school counselors for support. In February 2007, Fernanda was enrolled in a program for at-risk youth, but the intervention didn't succeed. She frequently stayed out late, sometimes not coming home at all. The police often found her hanging out with teenagers involved in drug use, and as a vulnerable young girl, she eventually adopted their habit, falling deeper into substance abuse. Though she continued living with her family, Fernanda became emotionally distant, spending most of her time sleeping and only leaving the house to meet friends and feed her addiction. Her school performance worsened and she eventually had to repeat a grade. Then tragedy struck. On July 2, 2012, Fernanda's father died suddenly from a stroke. Heartbroken, she honored him with a tattoo of his name. But his death only worsened her self-destructive tendencies. Family members attempted to step in, but their efforts often sparked intense arguments. Fernanda began drinking heavily and frequently spent nights away from home. Despite these challenges, she barely graduated from high school and eventually secured a job as a nightclub hostess. Unfortunately, that environment only worsened her unhealthy habit. She went through a string of unstable relationships and continued on a downward path until she met Louise Peterson, a 36-year-old taxi driver. Louise appeared to genuinely care for Fernanda and even earned Paula's trust, becoming a welcomed presence in their home. With his influence, Fernanda began to turn her life around, significantly cutting back on drug use. While their relationship wasn't without occasional drama, it remained relatively stable. Jealousy sometimes sparked tension, like the time Fernanda scratched Luis's taxi in a moment of anger, but such incidents were infrequent. Eventually, Fernanda left her nightclub job and took up a position as a waitress at a local restaurant, providing a healthier work environment. However, once her employer discovered she was pregnant, she was dismissed. Unlike before, Fernanda stood her ground. She filed a complaint with the labor inspectorate and was successfully reinstated. By the time she went missing, Fernanda had made notable progress in rebuilding her life. She was determined to forge a better future and was eagerly awaiting the arrival of her baby daughter. As weeks passed without any news, her family's frustration grew. On March 5, 2018, after nearly a month of unanswered questions, Fernanda's relatives officially filed a complaint against the Carabineros, criticizing their handling of the case. This prompted the involvement of the Policia de Investigaciones de Chile, PDI, a specialized investigative unit known for tackling complex criminal cases. The PDI quickly began exploring various theories to explain Fernanda's disappearance. One of the first theories suggested that Fernanda had run away, perhaps after an argument with Luis or to reunite with an old flame. This idea gained media attention when a couple vacationing in San Carlos de Bariloche, Argentina, claimed to have spotted a woman resembling Fernanda, who appeared to have undergone cosmetic surgery. Driven by hope, Paula traveled to Argentina to follow up on the lead. However, after an extensive search, she firmly rejected the runaway theory, insisting that Fernanda would never have left without her belongings and was excited about moving into the new home Luis was building for their growing family. Investigators then explored the possibility of a drug-related connection. Although Fernanda had distanced herself from that lifestyle, rumors emerged that she had been seen with a known drug dealer, Alexander Oyasin, and his partner, Maria Araya, the day before her disappearance. Witnesses claimed she was holding a package during the meeting. Yet, both Oyasin and Araya provided strong alibis and were eventually cleared. Focus then shifted to Joel Cuevas Flores, a local drug trafficker and one of Fernanda's former romantic partners. There were claims that Francesca Orellana, Joel Cuevas' girlfriend, had threatened Fernanda a year before her disappearance. However, when both were questioned while in custody for unrelated offenses, investigators found no link between them and Fernanda's case, leading to their dismissal as suspects. Another theory suggested Fernanda might have been involved in a fatal accident while traveling that day, but no physical evidence supported this, and security cameras showed no unusual activity. Without any signs of a crash, authorities quickly ruled out the accident theory. Some also considered the possibility of suicide, but friends and family strongly rejected this, pointing out that Fernanda was excited about her pregnancy and actively preparing for her child's future. There was also no history of severe depression to support this idea. A kidnapping theory was investigated as well, but with no ransom demands or physical evidence, it was deemed highly unlikely. Finally, detectives considered the possibility that Fernanda's previous drug involvement, or even her connections with people from that past, might have triggered violent retaliation, possibly linked to unpaid debt. However, like the other theories, no solid evidence supported this claim. With these leads exhausted, investigators shifted their attention to individuals close to Fernanda. Several suspects emerged, each with potential motives and opportunities, the foremost being her boyfriend, Louise Peterson. Though their relationship appeared stable, it had its challenges. Friends disclosed that Fernanda had expressed worries about Louise's temper, describing him as occasionally controlling and verbally aggressive. Louise acknowledged that they argued but firmly denied any physical abuse. "We had our disagreements like any couple," he said, "but we were excited about our daughter's arrival." Authorities conducted a detailed investigation and confirmed his alibi, which placed him far from Fernanda's last known whereabouts. Though doubts about the nature of Fernanda and Louise's relationship persisted, no concrete evidence connected him to any crime, and he was eventually cleared as a suspect. Another person of interest was a local taxi driver who had frequent contact with Fernanda. Friends said he had been overly persistent, often asking for her phone number and even offering baby clothes. The driver, however, denied any harassment, insisting that Fernanda had willingly given him her contact details after he once drove her to a hospital for a medical issue. Despite his defense, text messages recovered from Fernanda's phone suggested she had accused him of being too pushy. Nevertheless, the driver had a solid alibi, and forensic examinations of his vehicle found no signs of wrongdoing, leading to his exclusion as a suspect. Investigators then turned their attention to Fernanda's co-workers at the restaurant where she worked. While some acknowledged her recent efforts to turn her life around, others described her as difficult, pointing to frequent conflicts over tips and lateness. One supervisor even admitted, "None of us really liked her." Investigators, however, found no solid motive or opportunity linking any of Fernanda's co-workers to her disappearance, and they were all eventually cleared. But one person in Fernanda's life stood out, her longtime friend and neighbor, Felipe Andres Rojas Lobos. The two had known each other for more than 10 years, and it was widely known that Fernanda planned to meet Felipe at the winery and warehouse where he worked on the day she vanished. Security footage showed Fernanda walking toward that location at 5:29 p.m. Yet strangely, there was no video evidence of her actually entering the warehouse. When questioned, Felipe admitted he had intended to meet Fernanda that day, but insisted she never arrived. At 8:05 p.m., he even sent her a WhatsApp message saying, "You never came. Dude, I waited for you secretly." Despite this, investigators found his story suspicious and decided to examine his actions in the days following her disappearance more closely. Just 2 days later, surveillance footage captured Felipe carrying a 25-kilogram bag of cement into the warehouse, an unusual purchase unrelated to his job responsibilities. This immediately raised serious concerns. Then, on February 13th, Felipe was captured on camera inspecting security cameras along Lima Street, seemingly checking if they had recorded the warehouse entrance. Even more suspicious was that he had enlisted a friend, Christian Lobos Trujillo, to help him. Christian later informed the police that Felipe had specifically asked if the cameras were aimed at the warehouse. The very next day, February 14th, Felipe suddenly quit his job. This was unexpected since he had initially told his employers he planned to stay at least a year. His abrupt resignation only deepened the suspicions surrounding him. Early on, the Carabineros had searched both the warehouse and Felipe's home, but found no solid evidence of wrongdoing. Despite this, the PDI remained doubtful of his alibi as the case went cold and updates dwindled. Then, almost 16 months later, in June 2019, a major breakthrough happened. A woman came forward with a startling testimony. Choosing to remain anonymous, she was referred to as Nancy. She disclosed that Felipe had confessed to her that he was responsible for Fernanda's death. According to Nancy, Felipe admitted that he had met Fernanda at the warehouse on February 10. They smoked a joint and talked, but the conversation took a grim turn when Felipe mentioned his ex-girlfriend, whom he claimed was blackmailing him. Fernanda reportedly became confrontational, and in the heat of the moment Felipe pushed her. She fell, struck her head on a piece of furniture, and began convulsing. Panicked, Felipe tried to assist her. But when she became unresponsive, he didn't know how to react. In his panic, he decided to bury her in the backyard of the warehouse. At first, when Nancy confronted him about the confession, Felipe insisted he had fabricated the story due to stress. At first, Nancy believed his denial, but over time, she noticed a shift in Felipe's behavior. He became increasingly paranoid, constantly looking over his shoulder. He kept pleading with me not to tell anyone what he had said, she recalled. That's when she realized he wasn't lying. Acting on Nancy's information, investigators returned to the warehouse on June 24, 2019. What they uncovered not only confirmed their worst fears, but was even more disturbing than Nancy's account. On that day, forensic teams and police officers arrived at the warehouse on La Lima Street and began digging in the backyard, which was cluttered with debris and partly hidden by thick bushes. Using hand tools, the team carefully cleared the site, digging about 35 centimeters down before hitting something solid. Beneath the soil, they uncovered a concrete slab measuring roughly 115 by 50 centimeters and about 5 centimeters thick. What lay beneath would finally expose the tragic truth about Fernanda's fate. As they continued digging, they noticed a whitish powder, later identified as lime. They carefully excavated further until they revealed a white shoe still attached to a human foot. This was the first undeniable proof that a body had been found. Digging deeper, they uncovered a white tarp tightly wrapped around the remains. The body was positioned in a forced fetal position with hands bound by cloth. Despite the passage of time, the remains were remarkably well preserved, almost certainly Fernanda. Her dress was pulled up to her waist, revealing her lower body, and her underwear was torn and displaced. These details strongly indicated that Fernanda had suffered a violent assault prior to her death. Investigators observed that the body appeared mummified, likely preserved by the lime and cement surrounding it. Fernanda's mother, Paula, was called to the scene immediately, and upon seeing the earrings and clothing, she was overwhelmed with grief. Forensic experts soon confirmed the family's worst fears. Using fingerprint analysis and tattoo identification, the remains were officially confirmed as Fernanda Maciel Carrilla. A preliminary examination was performed at the site by the forensic team led by Dr. Vivian Bustos Bacuretso. The mummified condition of the body with no signs of insect activity suggested it had been buried soon after death, limiting exposure to the elements. During the autopsy, investigators made a critical finding: a fracture in Fernanda's hyoid bone, the U-shaped bone in the neck above the larynx. The fracture in the hyoid bone is often associated with strangulation, and further examinations confirmed this grim cause of death. Hemorrhagic infiltrates, internal bleeding, were found within the neck muscles, specifically the sternothyroid and sternohyoid. Compression injuries were also present in the larynx and trachea, firmly establishing that Fernanda had been strangled, either by hand or with a ligature. Wrapped tightly around her neck was a piece of canvas, knotted securely and used as the strangling instrument. The force exerted was strong enough not only to fracture her hyoid bone, but also to cause multiple other visible injuries. Experts determined that the strangulation likely triggered premature labor, breaking Fernanda's water. Tragically, the fetus suffered suffocation from oxygen deprivation as amniotic fluid entered its lungs. Due to the pressure from the heavy cement slab and soil compressing Fernanda's body, the fetus was expelled after death. At the burial site, investigators discovered several critical pieces of evidence. A set of rusty keys with a heart-shaped keychain that belonged to Fernanda, a torn black bra and pink underwear, both showing clear signs of a violent struggle. They also found a cement wrapper from the San Juan brand, which matched the cement Felipe had bought on February 12, 2018, directly linking him to the burial site. These discoveries revealed a disturbing scenario of deliberate planning and an effort to hide a violent crime. Surveillance footage was crucial in reconstructing the sequence of events surrounding Fernanda's disappearance. As evidence against Felipe continued to build, the investigation moved steadily toward uncovering the truth. On February 10, 2018, cameras recorded Felipe arriving at the warehouse by bicycle. Merely 12 minutes afterward, Fernanda was seen leaving her home, heading toward the warehouse, crossing Pago Street, and then vanishing behind thick foliage. At 5:33 p.m., two dogs exited the warehouse, likely released by Felipe after Fernanda had been brought inside. The crime is believed to have occurred sometime between 5:33 p.m. and 7:34 p.m. At 7:34 p.m., Felipe was captured leaving the warehouse on his bicycle, but rather than going straight home, just next door to Fernanda's house, he took a longer, winding route. Investigators later viewed this detour as an effort to avoid suspicion, possibly influenced by feelings of guilt. Just 2 days later, on February 12, Felipe was recorded buying a 25-kilogram bag of San Juan cement from a hardware store in Concali. The light blue bag with the same brand logo was later found at the crime scene. He returned to the store soon after, purchasing mortar this time, transporting both purchases by bicycle. On February 13, surveillance footage showed him inspecting cameras along the street. Then, on February 14, Felipe abruptly resigned from his warehouse job. Investigators saw these moves as calculated efforts to cover his tracks and avoid suspicion. Felipe Andres Rojas Lobos went to trial on March 6, 2013, facing a mountain of evidence presented by the prosecution. The trial featured testimony from more than 58 witnesses and insights from 41 forensic experts. Prosecutors highlighted the brutality of the crime, focusing on Fernandez's vulnerability as a pregnant woman who had trusted Felipe, a close friend, for over 10 years. Despite his lawyer's efforts to secure a retrial, the evidence against Felipe was overwhelming. The prosecution sought the maximum sentence, highlighting the crime's premeditated nature, his total lack of remorse, and the extreme violence involved. Felipe's credibility was further undermined by his inconsistent and delayed statements. He did not provide a clear account until December 20, 2020, nearly 34 months after Fernandez's disappearance. By then, investigators had already uncovered key evidence, including the location of her body, the cause of death, and the fact that Felipe was the only person with access to the warehouse on that day. His delayed testimony carried little weight compared to the facts already established. Cesar Gonzalez, the warehouse owner, and Christian Rivera, the manager, confirmed they were both on vacation that day, leaving Felipe as the only person with the warehouse keys. He was responsible for odd jobs and caring for the dogs. Additionally, Fernanda had told her close friend, Nicholas, she was meeting Felipe at the warehouse, placing him directly at the scene. The state of Fernanda's body revealed a grim and harrowing account of what had happened. Her dress had been lifted, revealing her lower body, and the torn state of her underwear strongly indicated sexual assault. These details pointed to a crime far more gruesome than what Felipe had admitted to Nancy. Moreover, he consistently lied to both investigators and Fernanda's mother, falsely claiming that she had never arrived at the warehouse, despite knowing she was already deceased. Felipe sent multiple WhatsApp messages to Fernanda on the day she vanished, all while pretending to be unaware of her fate. He even asked a company employee to provide false information regarding the time he returned the warehouse keys. To friends and family, he feigned worry about Fernanda's disappearance, fabricating excuses for purchasing lime, claiming his boss instructed him to buy it for painting a grotto, a story later disproven. He also deceived his ex-girlfriend, Nancy, initially telling her Fernanda died accidentally after hitting her head, only to change his version later. Further evidence showed he tried to manipulate witnesses, including pressuring Nancy to lie to authorities about the body's location, as several audio recordings confirmed. His behavior after the crime raised additional red flags. On February 12, he called his boss, Christian Rivera, asking for permission to leave work and search for Fernanda. Security footage, however, contradicted Felipe's claim. It showed that he never left the warehouse, but instead entered twice carrying what appeared to be bags of cement and mortar before finally departing at 4:18 p.m. This evidence strongly supported the prosecution's argument that he was preparing to bury Fernanda's body rather than searching for her. Throughout the investigation, Felipe exhibited a chilling absence of empathy or remorse. Witnesses described him as manipulative and cold-hearted, with one even recalling him making a cruel joke about Fernandez, saying, "She's now cooking somewhere." Prosecutors painted Felipe as a narcissistic psychopath who viewed his heinous actions with disturbing detachment. After months of inquiry, they reconstructed Fernandez's final moments in chilling detail. On February 10, 2018, she left her home, unaware she was walking into a deadly trap. Felipe, her neighbor and longtime friend of over 10 years, had lured her to a warehouse located at 1635 Lolima Street in Conchili. Carrying only her keys and phone, Fernanda had no reason to suspect the horror that awaited her. Evidence pointed to Felipe having planned the crime in advance. In the days before their meeting, he had already dug a grave in the warehouse courtyard, carefully sized to fit Fernanda's body. This level of preparation showed he intended to kill her and hide her remains long before they met. Around 5:30 p.m., Fernanda arrived at the warehouse. Just 3 minutes later, at 5:33 p.m., Felipe let the dogs out, likely to prevent them from interrupting his plan. Once inside, he betrayed her trust in the most brutal way possible. Using his physical advantage, he stood over 6 feet tall compared to Fernanda's petite 5-foot frame. He overpowered her from behind. As she fought back, he assaulted her, then bound and strangled her until she lost consciousness. The official autopsy confirmed that Fernanda died from asphyxiation caused by strangulation. However, forensic expert Dr. Carmen Soderlader proposed that Fernanda might still have been alive when she was buried. The evidence suggested she died from asphyxiation due to suffocation, likely caused by being tightly wrapped in cloth and forced into a fetal position that prevented her from breathing. Felipe had believed she was already dead after the violent attack, but in reality, she may have suffocated inside the shallow grave. Tragically, her unborn daughter, unable to survive, drowned in amniotic fluid. Every action Felipe took to conceal the crime was well documented. His purchase of cement and floor mortar, along with the receipts, was found at the crime scene, an astonishing oversight that revealed his recklessness. Fernanda's unborn daughter had already been given a name, chosen before the terrible crime took place: Baby Josefa. On April 25, 2023, the court sentenced Felipe Andres Rojas Lobos to the maximum penalty, qualified life imprisonment. The verdict highlighted the extreme cruelty of his actions, emphasizing the aggravating circumstances of deceit and premeditation, as well as the importance of maintaining public confidence in the justice system.